The seatbelt sign hadn't even switched off yet when the screaming started. I can't breathe. Somebody help me. I need to be moved to first class right now. 3 rows ahead of me, a woman in a leopard print scarf was clutching her chest, gasping in a way that looked less like a medical event and more like a dramatic reading of one. A flight attendant sprinted down the aisle. Passengers unbuckled to get a look. Somewhere behind me, a baby started crying from the commotion, and I sat there, in coach, seat 2 to C, watching a woman who 20 minutes earlier, at the gate, had loudly informed a total stranger that she always finds a way into first class. One way or another, I had a feeling I was about to watch her prove it. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, I fly constantly for work. And over the years I've learned that airports and airplanes bring out a very specific kind of person. The kind of treats a boarding pass like a personal insult and a flight crew like unpaid staff. Today's story is about a woman I'm going to call HOA Karen, because within the first hour of knowing her, she told anyone who'd listen that she runs her homeowners association like a Fortune 500 company, and clearly expected the airline industry to operate the exact same way. This story has fake symptoms, a very patient flight crew, a security investigation, and an ending so satisfying. I still think about it on long-haul flights. If you're into airport chaos and karma stories, make sure you're subscribed, because this channel is about to become your new favorite rabbit hole. Let's get into it. 3 weeks before this flight, my life looked pretty normal. I'd booked a routine business trip, a mid-morning flight, connecting through a major hub, landing just in time for a client meeting the next day. Nothing special. Coach, seat aisle, noise-canceling headphones. A book I'd been meaning to finish for months. I got to the airport with plenty of time to spare, grabbed a coffee, found a seat near my gate, and did what most business travelers do, answered emails, and people watched. The gate area was calm. Boarding hadn't started. Nothing about that morning suggested I was about to spend the next 4 hours watching a woman attempt the most elaborate seat upgrade scheme I'd ever witnessed. I remember thinking, at the time, that it was a nice, uneventful start to a trip. I should have known better. In my experience, the calmer the terminal, the bigger the storm that's coming. I'd gotten to know this particular airport well over the years. The good coffee stand near Gate B12. The security line that always moved faster if you went through the far left checkpoint. The food court that somehow still didn't have enough outlets for how many laptops were plugged in at any given moment. It's strange how familiar a place can become when you pass through it often enough. You start to notice the rhythm of it. The pre-boarding lull, the gate agent announcements, the low hum of rolling suitcases on tile. That morning had all the markings of a good travel day. My flight wasn't overbooked. The weather looked clear on the app. I even managed to get through security without taking my laptop out, which, if you fly often, is basically a personal victory. I settled in near my gate with my coffee, put in my headphones, and let myself relax for the first time in what felt like weeks. It's funny, looking back, how much I appreciated that quiet, because the moment boarding began, that calm evaporated completely. She arrived at the gate about 40 minutes before boarding, and you could hear her before you saw her. This is completely unacceptable, she was saying into her phone, loud enough for the entire gate area to hear. I run my HOA back home. I know how customer service is supposed to work, and this airline is going to hear from me. Let's call her Brenda. Designer sunglasses pushed up into perfectly styled hair, a rolling bag that probably cost more than my flight, and an aura that suggested she'd never once in her life been told no and actually accepted it. She approached the gate desk not once, not twice, but 3 times before boarding even started, each time asking about a first-class upgrade. Each time, the gate agent politely explained that first class was fully booked and there were no complimentary upgrades available. On her 3rd attempt, I heard her mutter to the woman next to her in line, a stranger, not even someone she knew. Don't worry, I always find a way into first class, one way or another. You just have to know how these things work. I didn't think much of it at the time. Primera azul de ave. Looking back, there were other small signs too. She'd cut in front of an elderly man in the boarding line, claiming she didn't see him there, even though he'd been standing at the podium for a solid minute. She loudly informed the gate agent that she was a platinum tier flyer with another airline, as if that carried any weight here. And when the agent politely explained that status didn't transfer between carriers, she rolled her eyes hard enough that I actually heard the sound her sunglasses made shifting on her head. At one point, she cornered a gate agent. Trainee clearly new, clearly nervous, and spent nearly 5 minutes explaining, in painstaking detail, how upgrades actually work behind the scenes, as if she had insider airline knowledge. Instead of just strong opinions, the trainee nodded politely the entire time. The universal customer service face for please stop talking to me. By the time boarding groups were called, I think most of the gate area had silently formed the same opinion of her. Nobody said anything out loud yet. We were all still in the polite wait-and-see phase of dealing with a difficult stranger. That phase wouldn't last much longer. Boarding started, and Brenda made her way down the jet bridge with the energy of someone being personally inconvenienced by the concept of coach seating. She ended up 2 rows ahead of me, in 19A, and immediately began complaining to the flight attendant, to nearby passengers, to no one in particular, about the seat width. The recycled air, the fact that her knees don't fold like other people's. At one point, she asked the flight attendant directly if there was any way at all to move her to first class, mentioning she had a medical condition that requires more space. The flight attendant, professional as ever, explained that without documentation submitted in advance, they couldn't make that accommodation mid-boarding, but that she was welcome to speak to a gate agent about it after landing for future flights. Brenda's smile went thin. "We'll see about that," she said, in a tone that made the woman sitting next to her actually lean away. I remember catching the eye of another passenger across the aisle, and we did that silent thing strangers do when they both clock the same red flag at the same time. "A little did you hear that too?" "Look." She had. Takeoff happened without incident. The seatbelt sign stayed on a little longer than usual due to some turbulence over the coast, and once it switched off, the cabin settled into that familiar low hum of a long flight. Trays coming down, headphones going in, a couple of people already asleep. That's when things started getting strange. A woman near the front reported that her carry-on bag, which she'd stored in the overhead bin above row 18, had been opened and rifled through, nothing stolen, as far as she could tell, but the zipper was open and her belongings were shuffled. She hadn't touched it since boarding. Then a man in row 20 mentioned that his in-flight entertainment screen had somehow been reserved under a different name when he tried to use it, locking him out of his own seat system for nearly 20 minutes. And the flight attendant working that section quietly told her colleague within earshot of a few of us that a blanket and pillows set from the first-class cabin had gone missing sometime after boarding, despite no first-class passengers reporting needing extras. None of it seemed connected. Not yet. But Brenda had made 2 separate trips to the front galley to stretch her legs, and each time she'd lingered by the first-class curtain a beat longer than a bathroom trip really requires. I wasn't the only one who noticed. The passenger next to me, an older man doing a crossword, glanced up over his glasses and murmured, "That woman's up to something." I had the exact same thought. There's a particular energy that spreads through a cabin when multiple strangers start noticing the same small inconsistencies. Nobody says anything directly. Instead, you get a lot of raised eyebrows, quiet glances, the occasional whispered comment to a seat. By the 90-minute mark, at least 4 or 5 of us around that section of the plane were quietly tracking Brenda's movements without ever having spoken a word to each other about Italiano. It's a strange kind of unspoken teamwork, a cabin full of strangers, all independently deciding something is off here, and all deciding to pay closer attention just in case. I found myself doing something I don't normally do on flights, actually watching the aisle instead of my book. Call it curiosity, call it a gut feeling, but I wanted to see where this was heading. I didn't have to wait long. About 90 minutes into the flight, the real event started. The one Brenda had clearly been building toward the whole time. She stood up suddenly, gripping the seat back in front of her, and started breathing in short, exaggerated gasps. "I can't breathe," she announced, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "Something's wrong. I need help. I need to be moved somewhere with more air." The flight attendants responded exactly the way they're trained to: fast, calm, and thorough. Within a minute, 2 attendants were at her side, one checking her pulse, the other radioing the front for a medical kit and asking if there happened to be a doctor on board. A passenger from business class, who introduced himself as an R nurse, made his way back to help. He checked her pulse, her breathing, asked her a series of standard questions. Her pulse, he noted quietly to the lead flight attendant, was completely normal. Her breathing pattern, while dramatic, wasn't consistent with any actual respiratory distress he recognized. Still, protocol is protocol, and the crew wasn't about to gamble with someone's safety. They asked Brenda a series of questions. Did she have a medical history? Was she on any medication? Had this happened before? She answered vaguely, then pivoted, almost seamlessly, into a new request. I think I just need more space to breathe properly. If I could just move to first class, hit some air room, I think I'd recover. The nurse and the lead flight attendant exchanged a look. It was subtle, but I caught it. That's the exact moment the crew started quietly, connecting the dots. The badgering at the gate, the repeated trips to the front galley. And now, a sudden medical emergency. With a suspiciously specific cure, the lead flight attendant made a decision. She informed Brenda, gently but firmly, that as a precaution they'd monitor her from her current seat for the time being, and that a wheelchair and full medical evaluation would be arranged upon landing, per airline safety policy for any reported medical event. No first-class move, just a wheelchair, paperwork, and an incident report. Brenda's symptoms improved remarkably fast after hearing that. It was almost comedic. In hindsight, how quickly her breathing regulated the moment the words wheelchair and paperwork entered the conversation instead of first class. The gasping softened into irregular, occasional sighs. The hand clutching her chest relaxed. Within about 90 seconds of learning there was no upgrade coming. She was scrolling her phone again like nothing had happened, though she kept one eye on the crew, clearly recalculating her next move. The UR nurse who'd helped out returned to his seat in business class, but not before quietly telling the flight attendant, loud enough for a few of us to hear, "For what it's worth, I've seen real panic attacks and real cardiac symptoms." That wasn't either. The flight attendant thanked him and made a note on the incident form she was already filling out, tucked discreetly into a folder she kept in the galley. Meanwhile, the flight attendants quietly began piecing together the missing items. The lead flight attendant checked the overhead bin near Brenda's row and found the missing first-class blanket and pillow set tucked under Brenda's seat, still in their packaging. She also pulled up the entertainment system log and found that the reserve screen issue in row 20 traced back to a login attempt from a seat to rows from Brenda's, at a time when Brenda had been seen walking that aisle. It wasn't hard proof of everything, but it was enough of a pattern that the crew quietly documented the whole sequence of events, times, witnesses, and items. For the incident report they were now required to file regardless of how the emergency resolved. When the lead flight attendant returned to Brenda's row holding the first-class blanket and pillow set, still sealed in their airline packaging, the entire section went quiet. "Ma'am, can you explain why this was under your seat?" Brenda blinked. "I found it there. Someone must have left it. It's from the first-class cabin," the flight attendant said evenly, "and a colleague of mine noticed you near that curtain twice before your medical episode started." "That doesn't mean anything," Brenda said, her voice climbing. "I was just walking around. My doctor says I need to stay mobile." "We also had a passenger in row 20 locked out of his entertainment system under a login that traces to a seat near yours." The flight attendant continued .com as Stillwater, and another passenger reported their bag had been gone through. The nurse who'd examined her chimed in quietly. For what it's worth, her vitals were completely normal. No signs of respiratory distress. You could feel it, that shift in the cabin where dozens of strangers all silently reached the same conclusion at once. A woman near me actually said, out loud, "Oh, she was faking it," and didn't bother to whisper. Brenda's face went red. "This is outrageous. I have a genuine medical condition and I am being harassed. Ma'am, we take medical events seriously, which is why we responded the way we did," the flight attendant said. "But we're also required to document irregularities, and there are quite a few here." BDS point. Most of economy class was fully invested. Someone to row's back had their phone out, filming not obnoxiously, just quietly documenting, the way people do now when they sense a story is happening in real time. "This is discrimination," Brenda announced to the cabin at large, standing up despite the seatbelt signs still being illuminated from earlier turbulence warnings. "I run an HOA. I know my rights. I will be contacting corporate. I will be contacting a lawyer. I will make sure everyone on this flight knows how badly I was treated today. Ma'am, I need you to sit down and keep your seatbelt fastened," the flight attendant said, unbothered by the speech. "For your safety." "My safety?" You people nearly let me have a heart attack because you wouldn't move me 8 rows. A man near the front called out, not unkindly, "Ma'am, your pulse was normal. The nurse said so." "Nobody asked you," Brenda snapped. "He kind of did get asked," someone else muttered. "By you. When you demanded a doctor." A ripple of laughter went through the cabin, quiet, but unmistakable. Brenda's face went from red to a deeper shade I didn't know was medically possible without an actual emergency. The lead flight attendant, still calm, informed her that the captain had been notified of the situation, that a full incident report was being filed, and that upon landing, airport security and airline representatives would need to speak with her regarding both the missing first-class items and the nature of her reported medical emergency. "Are you arresting me?" Brenda said, loud enough that a baby 2 rows back started crying again. "No one said anything about arresting you," the flight attendant replied. "We're following standard procedure." If Brenda had simply sat down at that point, this story might have ended a lot more quietly. Instead, she doubled down. She unbuckled again despite direct instruction not to, and made her way toward the front of the plane, insisting she needed to speak to the captain personally about her treatment. A flight attendant intercepted her before she reached the cockpit area, calmly but firmly explaining that no passenger is permitted near the flight deck during flight, for any reason. Brenda pivoted her outrage toward nearby passengers, trying to recruit sympathy. She turned to the man across from me and said, "Can you believe this? They're treating me like a criminal for having a medical episode." He didn't even look up from his book. "I watched you hide a blanket under your seat, so, kind of, yeah." She turned to the woman next to her. "This is exactly the kind of disorganized nonsense I deal with. Fighting incompetence at every level. My HOA runs smoother than this airline." The woman just put her headphones in. Undeterred, Brenda pulled out her phone and began recording her own video, narrating dramatically about being silenced and denied medical care, clearly hoping to build some kind of public sympathy campaign before the flight even landed. She live-streamed part of it, saying she was going to expose the airline the second they touched ground. The problem was, half the cabin had already seen the real version of events, and several passengers, myself included, had been quietly taking notes. Tom's quotes, what the nurse had said, in case the airline needed corroboration. This wasn't going to be a he said. There were witnesses. Plural. We landed a little over 2 hours later. The seatbelt sign chimed off, and instead of the usual scramble to the overhead bins, most of the cabin stayed seated, watching. 2 airport security officers and an airline duty manager were waiting right at the gate. Brenda was asked to remain in her seat until the rest of the cabin deplaned standard procedure for a passenger involved in an active incident report. As the rest of us filed past her row, I watched the duty manager calmly explain that, due to the combination of factors, the reported medical emergency inconsistent with a medical professional's on-site assessment, the recovered first-class items found in her possession, and the unauthorized attempt to access the flight deck area, the airline would be conducting a full review of the incident, and that her travel privileges with the airline were being suspended pending that investigation. Brenda's voice cracked through the jet bridge as we walked out. "This is ridiculous. I want a supervisor. I am the supervisor," the duty manager said, not unkindly, just factually. By the time I reached the gate area, word had already started spreading among passengers waiting for their connections nearby. The story of the first-class blanket lady who faked a medical emergency and got caught red-handed. A few people actually applauded, quietly, as she was escorted toward the airline's customer service office rather than toward baggage claim. Kicker. She'd been so focused on avoiding a routine coach flight that she ended up spending the next several hours in a much less comfortable seat, a plastic chair in an airline security office, filling out incident paperwork instead of catching her connecting flight at all. News like this doesn't stay contained to one gate for long. By the time I reached baggage claim, 2 other passengers from the flight found me to compare notes, half lugging, half still in disbelief at what we'd all just witnessed together. One of them, the man who'd been doing the crossword, said it was the most entertaining flight delay of my life, and I wasn't even delayed. A few days later, the airline reached out to several passengers, myself included, requesting written statements for their internal investigation. I gave mine honestly. What I saw, what I heard. Nothing embellished, because the truth alone was wild enough. About 2 weeks after that, I got a short follow-up email from the airline thanking me for my cooperation, along with a travel voucher for the inconvenience of the delayed connection some of us experienced due to the incident. No details were shared about Brenda's case. Specifically, airlines don't typically publicize individual passenger outcomes. But based on the conversation with the duty manager at the gate, it was clear her relationship with that airline was not going to continue as usual. Locally, word apparently got back to her neighborhood too. One of the passengers who'd exchanged information with me at baggage claim mentioned, almost as an aside weeks later, that she'd seen an online post in a regional community forum about an HOA president involved in some kind of airline incident, with neighbors speculating in the comments. Small world, apparently, even outside the airport. As for me, I made my meeting the next morning with time to spare. Told this story to exactly no one at first, because it sounded too unbelievable until I realized I had witnesses, timestamps, and a very memorable flight attendant, who probably deserves a raise. Here's what stuck with me about this whole situation. Brenda didn't get caught because she was unlucky. She got caught because she treated a flight crew's genuine concern for her safety as a tool to manipulate, and she assumed that confidence and volume would carry her past any scrutiny. The same way, it seemed, she was used to operating in her own neighborhood. But an airplane cabin isn't a homeowner's meeting. You can't out-argue a trained flight crew, and you definitely can't out-argue a room full of witnesses who all watched the same thing happen in real time. Real medical emergencies deserve real urgency, and the crew on that flight responded exactly the way they should have: fast, careful, and by the book. That's exactly what made the fake so obvious once the facts didn't line up. If there's a lesson here, it's a simple one. The systems in place at airports and on airplanes exist for good reason, and trying to exploit them for a free upgrade doesn't just risk embarrassment. It risks consequences a lot more serious than a coach seat ever could be. So here's my question for you. If you'd been sitting 2 rows away and watched this whole thing unfold, would you have said something in the moment? Or just watched it play out like the rest of us did? Drop your answer in the comments and let me know what the wildest thing you've ever witnessed on a flight was. I might feature it in a future video. If you enjoyed this one, make sure you're subscribed, because trust me, Brenda is not the last Karen I've flown with.